Hello friends, I'm Dr. Rajesh Chokhania, General Pediatrician from Bandra, and today we will be talking on history to define the anatomy first. As has already been emphasized, the history can provide the provisional diagnosis in almost 85% of the cases, and the four parts of the provisional diagnosis are anatomy, pathology, etiology, and malfunction. So what is this concept of defining the anatomy on history? Imagine that we are all sitting in this room and suddenly the lights go off. Do we always rush to call the electricity provider? No. What we do is instinctively we first define whether the darkness is only in this room or in our flat or in our whole building or in our whole neighborhood, and then take action accordingly. In other words, we first try to define the anatomy because what is the problem and why is the problem depends on what the anatomy is. Similarly, during history taking, we must always try to define the anatomy of the disease first. This is because where is the problem is the anatomy, and what is the problem is the pathology, and what is the problem depends on where is the problem. Let's take an example. In an adult with chest pain, if we decide that the anatomy of the disease is the heart, then most likely the pathology is infarction due to ischemia. Whereas if we decide that the anatomy is the lung and pleura, then most likely the pathology is inflammation due to infection. And we realize that the reverse is very uncommon. So you will now very rarely get inflammation in the heart and ischemia in the lung. When a symptom is presented to a clinician, the symptom arises from a primary organ of origin. We tend to assume that the disease lies in that primary organ, but this may or may not be true. It is possible that there are other organs which cause that symptom by indirectly affecting the primary organ of origin. Let's take the example of cough. It's primarily respiratory in origin, but even a GER can cause cough due to microaspiration in the GI tract. So here, the anatomy of the disease is in the GI tract, and the symptom of cough is mediated through the primary organ, that is the respiratory tract. Similarly, breathlessness can be primarily respiratory in origin, but it can also be cardiac, metabolic, renal, neurological, psychogenic in origin. So, in other words, the anatomy of a patient who presents with cough could be besides the respiratory tract, the GI tract, the CNS, or even the CVS. So, what have we learned? That a symptom can effectively arise from any of multiple anatomical sites. Now, let us decide how we localize the anatomy of the disease. So, how does one figure out that the anatomy of the disease may be sometimes other than the primary organ of origin of that symptom? It is largely by looking at the accompanying symptoms. So for example, vomiting is a primarily upper GI in origin. When it is associated with diarrhea and constipation, the anatomy changes to the lower GI tract. When it is associated with headache, the anatomy can be the CNS. When it is associated with nausea and vomiting, the anatomy can be the liver. When it is associated with oliguria and edema, the anatomy can be the kidney. And when it is associated with extreme generalized weakness, the anatomy may be the adrenal gland. How do all these varied organs cause or mediate vomiting through its primary organ, that is upper GI? It is through the CTZ or the chemoreceptor trigger zone, which is stimulated either by, let's say, increased intracranial pressure or some metabolite circulating in the blood, which then causes the vomiting. Even severe cough can cause vomiting by increased mechanical pressure on the stomach. So in this case, the anatomy of the vomiting is the respiratory tract. Once we have decided the anatomy of the disease, the next step is to try and further define the microanatomy of the disease. That is, we must try and localize the disease to an even smaller part of that organ or system. How do we do this? This is done because many symptoms can occur only due to some subpart of a organ or system. And when a symptom can be caused by all the subparts of that organ, either its accompanying symptoms are different or its characteristics are different. For example, let's divide the respiratory system into 4 parts for the clinician. These are the airway, the parenchyma, the pleura and the interstitium. Now, pain can only be due to pleural involvement. Significant cough is a sign of an airway disease. Cough is not a predominant symptom when it comes to parenchymal, pleural or interstitial disease. Further, if the cough is dry, with or without hoarseness or stridor, we can even localize the anatomy to the upper airway, and if the cough is wet, with or without breathlessness, we localize the anatomy to the lower airway. So we can go this far in the microanatomy. Similarly, breathlessness can be caused by all 4 parts of the respiratory system, but its characteristics are different. So breathlessness, which is due to airway disease, is accompanied with significant cough, whereas breathlessness due to parenchymal disease is preceded by high fever and cough occurs a little later in the disease. When we are trying to localize the microanatomy, we must also understand that the disease can start in one anatomical site, and as time progresses, it may progress to involve adjacent sites. So, the clinical presentation may not be the pure presentation when we see the patient. So we may have to go back in the history to the onset of complaints to define the anatomy at the starting point. Let's now extend this exercise of defining the microanatomy to the kidney. For clinicians, the kidney can be divided into 3 parts mainly: the glomeruli, the tubules and the collecting system. The glomeruli can be further divided into the endothelium, the epithelium and the interstitium. Now, hematuria can occur only due to glomerular disease or the collecting system disease. It does not occur due to tubular disease. Even within those two, the characteristics of the hematuria are different. Once we have ruled out pre-renal oliguria and retention of urine, oliguria can only occur due to glomerular endothelial disease. The anatomy of renal edema can only be glomerular endothelium or glomerular epithelium, and so on and so forth. So, we can almost summarize the renal microanatomy and its representative symptoms as follows. Glomerular endothelium is hematuria, oliguria, mild edema, and then of course on examination signs like hypertension. Glomerular epithelium, massive edema. Glomerular interstitium, only hematuria without any other renal dysfunction. Tubules, failure to thrive, rickets, polyuria. Collecting system, painful but at times painless hematuria but fresh red blood. We can further localize the anatomy to the lower collecting system if there are symptoms like frequency, urgency and dysuria, and to the upper collecting system if the patient is sick. Lastly, let's look at the liver and see how we can localize the microanatomy. The liver can be divided for clinicians into again 4 parts: the hepatocyte, the biliary tract, the venous system and the reticuloendothelial system. Jaundice as a symptom can occur only due to hepatocyte disease or biliary tract disease. We can localize the anatomy to the hepatocyte if there are other accompanying symptoms of hepatocyte dysfunction, whether acute or chronic, like nausea or vomiting, loss of appetite, edema, poor growth or bleeding. Conjugated jaundice is a hallmark symptom of biliary tract disease, other symptoms being itching or clay-colored stools. We notice that jaundice is a symptom of both hepatocyte and biliary tract disease, but there is a difference. In hepatocyte disease, the patient is usually sick, whereas in biliary tract disease, the patient is relatively comfortable with disproportionately deeper jaundice. We can localize the anatomy to the venous system if there are symptoms of portal hypertension like abdominal distension suggesting ascites or hematemesis. Of course, on examination we will find signs like splenomegaly. We can localize the anatomy to the reticuloendothelial system if the clinical symptom is only abdominal distension suggesting hepatosplenomegaly without any dysfunction of the hepatocyte, biliary tract or the venous system. Of course, there can be constitutional symptoms like fever, loss of weight, etc. So, friends, it is clear that when a clinician is presented with a symptom, the underlying disease can be affecting any of multiple anatomical sites. With a skillfully elicited detailed history, it is clinically possible to localize the anatomy. In fact, we can further divide various systems into clinically relevant subparts and localize the disease to even the microanatomy within that organ or system in most cases. This is a very important first step during history taking, which then channelizes our process of thinking to obtain the subsequent parts of the complete provisional diagnosis, that is pathology, etiology and malfunction. Thank you. The next video will be by Dr. Khare sir on how to decide pathology on history.